our lineup somewhere in the coming months. First things first now, because today's lecture will be given by Professor Sanne Kruikemeier, Professor in Digital Media and Society at Wageningen University Research. She's an internationally recognized scholar whose research explores how digitalization is transforming society, with a particular focus on social media, online political communication, polarization, and digital journalism. She leads several major international projects, including ERC-funded research on online political targeting, and she's co-founder and director of the Digital Data and Democracy Lab. Her work has received numerous international and national awards, and she has advanced our understanding of the opportunities but also challenges that digital technologies pose for democratic societies. And this is also what she will talk about today, namely research on AI and political communication. So Sanne, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the nice introduction, and also for giving me the opportunity to talk about this, because also it also helped me to also think a little bit about this project, right, in a broader sense. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. But I also at the start I was a little bit thinking, what should I talk about? Because it feels a little bit like a paradox, right, to talk about PolCom Classics and then AI. But I tried to give you a little bit of an overview, because actually I think AI is not so new, right? So also this slide which shows Alan Turing, who came up with artificial intelligence in the 50s actually. And he basically asked the question, can computers think? And he developed a test for this, which later was coined the Turing test. But it was also used in the past, and maybe you know this movie as well, The Imitation Game. So this is the term he used as well. But you also see a lot of in popular culture this idea, right? Can computers think? And the movie Her or even WALL-E, I think, are a little bit based on that same idea. So I think it's not very new, this topic. But I think if we look at political communication, especially when generative AI became more easy to use, we see an upsurge of the discussion on generative AI or AI in general. These are news articles, and you see that it increased a lot after 2023. And you see that it increased in popularity. And you see also the same type of trend also in the scientific literature. So I started a little bit by looking at the communication and mass media database, where you can look up articles which are specifically focused on communication science. And here you see all the articles that mention either political or politics or political communication and communication science. This is a very quick analysis, but you can clearly see here an increase in the research on artificial intelligence and political communication. I also looked a little bit at the methods, because I'm also very much an empirical scholar, right? So I was also very interested to see what type of methods different scientists use. And you see here that computational methods are very popular, but also survey research, experimental designs, qualitative approaches are used. Content analysis and discourse analysis, not so much. And it's also not that a lot of people use a lot of mixed methods, but this is very also a quick overview, right? So I'm also curious if you do an actual literary review, if you find different results, but it's also a little bit in line what we see with other reviews in the field, which I talk about in a little bit in a minute. So these are the different topics. So I looked at different topics or subtopics basically in political communication, and to see what type of topics are actually covered. So you see that a lot of research is on misinformation, not so much about political advertisements, a lot also on political psychology, political campaigning, digital political communication, which is a little bit of an umbrella thing. Also political rhetoric and discourse is pretty popular. So here you see the different topics. But today I don't want to talk about all the topics, because I'm also not that knowledgeable about all the topics, but I thought it would be nice to give you an overview about misinformation, political journalism, and political campaigning, to see what is the past, what is the present, and what is the future, right? So what is the research agenda? And I will talk a little bit about current research I'm currently doing, because I think it's also fun to talk about actual research findings. So that also relates to this. So I want to start with misinformation. So if you look at AI in disinformation research, disinformation research and AI is mainly focusing on its dual role. So it can be a source of disinformation, but it can also be a potential solution. And this is also what you see also in the papers that are published. And this is a nice paper by Groep and Humbrecht, which published a recent literature review on this topic, AI and disinformation research, and also give an overview of different topics used. So I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in this, to look at their article. And they show that a lot of research is also coming from the US, which is, I think, no surprise, but also from India, for instance. But here you see a little bit of geographical spread of the research. But I think what I really like about the paper is that they have this dual role, but they also define it. So they find the roles of AI in disinformation research. And you can see here what type of 4 different roles AI can have in this specific field. So first of all, it's focusing on the dissemination, right? So who is spreading misinformation and what is the role of AI in this? So the research is focusing on social bots, on clickbait, on astroturfing. And the research is very much looking at the role that is placed on automated actors instead of actual disseminators, right? So what do these automated actors do, and how do they spread misinformation? The second role is focusing on a generation of disinformation, for instance, such as deep fakes, but also how generative AI is used. But it's also a challenging field because, especially with generative AI and deep fakes, there's a lot of multimodality. And the technological developments are going very, very fast, right? So if you do a study, for instance, on deepfakes, a year later, it might be completely different. So this is very much a challenge if you do research in the field of AI and disinformation on how different forms of misinformation are created using AI. Then there's a lot of research on the detection of disinformation and how you can do that. And there are different detection models, such as learning-based approaches, but feature-based approaches, knowledge-based approaches. And research shows that they vary in performance. And it highly depends on the training and data, and also data access, right? And this last part is becoming increasingly difficult. But I would say the most of the research is focusing very much on this detection. And also here, there's a large issue with the multimodality on the one hand, but also languages and different contexts, which play a role here. And the last role of AI is focusing on the correction of misinformation, how you can automatically, for instance, flag information, or how does content moderation work, literacy models, fact-checking. But here we see not so much research, so there's insufficient empirical support. And also Groep and Humbrecht noticed that it depends also very much on the resources and platforms that are included. And there's not much focus on cultural differences, especially with correcting disinformation, especially with the role of AI. This is very important. So here you see the results of their overview, and you see here they make a difference between research from the Global South and the Global North. That most research on the role of AI in disinformation research is focusing on the detection and not so much on the other fields. You see a little bit more spread in the Global North, but still also a large focus on the detection of misinformation using artificial intelligence. So they also identified a few research gaps, and the research gaps in other fields are also sometimes a little bit the same, sometimes a little bit different, but I think it will be nice to walk you through the ones that Groep and Humbrecht mentioned in their article. So you see that they say there's a descriptive research gap in focusing on underrepresented regions, but also they urge for more detection models with low research language models and multimodal data, and how you can use that also from a computational perspective. They also have a few methodological research gaps. For instance, they argue that there should be more empirical testing of AI disinformation impacting the countermeasures. But they also urge for more mixed method approaches and also cross-country comparative studies, because in a lot of cases you use the same generative AI model, but how does that work in practice, for instance, in different contexts? and focus more on real-world evaluation of detection tools, because they think it's very important to focus more research on, for instance, browser extensions which can be used also in the real world, or content moderation, for instance. So they also identify a few theoretical and conceptual gaps. So they argue that there should be more theoretical work on this, either by updating certain theories, such as cultivation theory or the spiral science theory, but also believes that there should be more new frameworks be developed about AI communication, which can be used from other subfields, but they urge basically to either update or come up with new frameworks that help us understand also some of the impacts. Also, conceptual work on AI regulation is important, also from different contexts, and the role of automated actors, because now there's a lot of research on less on this automation and, for instance, bots, and they argue that it's important to focus more also theoretically on these more automated actors, which also play a role in, for instance, the spread of mis and disinformation using AI. So now I want to go to the field of political journalism, because I also found a nice and interesting literature review on this topic, which look at publications on AI in journalism. It's not very much focused specifically on political communication, but I think it's very much related, also the way they describe it. So I think it might be very interesting to also discuss some of their results. So they see the same, right? The same increase in publications starting in 2016 and then increasingly fast also in this specific field. So they found a few different interesting findings, I think. So the first one is that research on AI in journalism is very much focusing on the newsroom, how the newsroom is adopting some of these tools, and how that works culturally and operationally, and how that and how they accommodate basically the introduction of these AI systems. So it's very much focusing on skill gaps between having editorial autonomy and how you deal with bots, for instance, how you can integrate this in workflow approaches, for instance, whether there's institutional resistance, for instance, within newsrooms. Then a large body of research in this field is focusing on the ethical and professional considerations. So how much do you depend on platforms? How does it affect your journalistic standards? Are there legal issues, for instance? How are you transparent about algorithms, for instance? And how can you develop, for instance, governance structures and ethical principles to make it more responsible, the use of it? So this is also part of the current research. And the last one I want to highlight is also the use of AI tools in innovation in journalism. So it's more about how journalists have a real life application of AI. For instance, how generative models such as ChatGPT and other forms of tools can be used in news creation, in articles, and how it can support journalists, for instance. And it's also more about how AI is changing the way news is produced and distributed and personalized, and how that can be done. And the last one, and I don't want to go into detail about this because this relates a little bit to the misinformation literature, is also about, verification, for instance, and the role of misinformation, and how you, for instance, can verify context. So in the journalism field and AI, it's also very much about the dangers a little bit towards the use of AI in journalism, and that it becomes super difficult to verify the information that is used in these platforms, and if you use that, for instance, in the news creation, or whether you write articles, how that affects the journalist. So Mola and Hassan also wrote down a future research agenda. I thought it would be nice to also highlight it for this specific field. So they are basically saying the same, right? So expand Global South research, especially in countries where there's increasing censorship, for instance, or language challenges. They also urge for more interdisciplinary methods, so combining different types of research, so for instance, computational analysis with ethnography, interviews, and policy research, for instance. They also urge others to examine newsroom practices, especially how they adopt or resist or govern AI tools. This is very important, I think, in future research as well. And it's the same with my own experience in that sense. They also believe that's very important to conduct longitudinal studies. So how are policy changes? How do audiences respond to AI-generated content? What are regulations, especially I think in Europe with the new AI Act, for instance? And how does that relate to their AI performance over time? And then I think it's something which they also very much highlight is the focus on different trends, for instance, especially the personalization of news content that is brought to the audience, for instance. Sometimes it's good to bridge also this perspective, for instance, the legal and the social science perspective. And the last point they highlight is also to learn for formulated fields, because some of the questions are not so new, but still very important. And they look also at different type of insight from, for instance, digital heritage research or cultural preservation research. I want to move to the field where I feel I'm most comfortable with, I would say, is political campaigning, where I do also my own research in. I could not find very much a literature review, but I think a very interesting, more recent article from Simon and Altai, which also basically discussed this. So they discussed some common misconceptions, I would say, and then they discuss them, and they give a lot of questions that are still need to be answered by researchers. And I think it might be nice to highlight those as giving you a future agenda. And what I thought was also very fascinating is that they made this graph and they looked for news articles where they look for two terms, that's AI in elections and threats. And here you can see that a lot of research also focusing on this topic is very much having a little bit of a negativity bias, but you see that it stabilizes and it declines a little bit. So I think people are a little bit less afraid of the threats. I'm not sure if that has to do with the research coming out, but it's interesting to see that it's stabilized a little bit, it's going down actually. So what is very nice about the article is indeed that they have this, that they focus a little bit more on the arguments that have been made, the explanation, they explain that argument, so an explanation of the claim, and then identify different open questions. If you're very much interested in the political campaigning literature and the role of AI, I think this is a very interesting article. I very much like it. But here you can see some of the arguments, and I want to walk you through those. So here, for instance, you see there's a lot of discussion on the increased quantity of information and misinformation due to AI. That's often claimed, right? That we see that there will be a high influx of misinformation due to AI because it can create information at scale with great ease. But we don't know that much about it, right, still. So these are some of the questions that are highlighted, and I thought this one is interesting. The third one, what are the sources and distribution networks for AI-generated election information? Because we also don't know that much about where it's coming from, right? Is it from more domestic actors or from foreign interference? So this, I think, is a very interesting question in this sense. Then it's not only about the quantity, but also the quality, that the quality gets better because it's more realistic and can be developed at low cost, basically. But we don't know that much about, and this is one of the questions they highlight, how much this perceived quality also impacts as voters, for instance. Is not a cheap fake more effective than a deep fake, for instance? Then the third one is about the personalization. So the idea, right, that you can use generative AI, for instance, for micro-targeting, also a specific type of misinformation to different people. And here it's argued that this can also happen on high scale because it's very easy also with platforms. But we don't know that much about how effective are these personalized AI-generated messages in influence actual political attitudes and behaviors. So the next one is about new modes of information consumption. So the argument is that it leads to changing consumption patterns around election information, right? So looking up election information using ChatGPT, right? And some research also asked this during the election period. Did you use AI or generative AI to inform yourself about the election? So we don't know that much about the quality, the level of detail, for instance, the plurality of views, right? Are different viewpoints shown to which people? So these are some of the questions that have not been answered. Then the destabilization of reality. Some have argued that it's so difficult to detect what is generative AI and what not. I always assume that I know, but I also still fall for a lot of generative AI things. So here you can clearly see that this is still a gap in research as well. And can it then also lead, for instance, to political cynicism and distrust, right? If it becomes so realistic, is it so difficult to disentangle that it also increases more distrust, so that boomerang effect, which we often talk about in misinformation. And then it also might affect human AI relationship, right? So this is also a little bit, I always have to think about the movie Her, right? That you get this personalized or persistent relationship with AI, which sometimes if people say that, right, oh, I need to have this discussion with chat, and then you have like this personal relationship, and how does it affect, for instance, information about politics or political issues? So one of the questions are, do users form deeper relationship with AI system at scale, right? And how do they value this? And are there specific users who are more at risk? And then they identify some of the more general questions, right? So more questions about how are political actors using generative AI, and what strategies do individuals and institutions use to identify or resist generated misinformation, right? This is very much so having more of a micro and meso perspective. So I think these are very interesting questions and give also an agenda, I think, for future research, because a lot of claims are made, but what's actually true, I think, and they're completely right, I think, we still don't know in that sense. So this is my second part of the presentation, is to talk a little bit more about our own research, and this is coming from the ERC. So I focus in this research on questions that are identified before in the research agenda, and it relates a little bit to these three different questions. So how effective are personalized AI-generated messages in influencing political attitudes and behavior? Do personalized messages have a greater impact than generic messages? And how does personalized interact with other factors such as pre-existing beliefs? And I focus my research very much on the first and third question, and I want to walk you through the research that I've done in this regard. And this idea is also coming from the notion that at the start of the ERC project, there was not so much discussion about the use of generative AI in political messages. It was mostly about micro-targeting and using messages which are connected to people's interest or background characteristics. But when the ERC developed, we saw these type of messages also around. So the first one is from the election in Hungary, where a lot of war images of children and seeing their father going to war. So a lot of fear appeals, for instance. We all know the video from Trump, also the Greenland AI messages in the third one. And the last one is around, I think it's around the EU election as well. Where we see a lot of these images flowing around on the internet. Some are even from political parties, some are just also developed by citizens, for instance. And I wanted to understand a little bit this impact, right? So what is the impact of this AI-generated content, even if it's also tied to people's own identities, and whether the effects are then stronger. So this is the basic questions. How does AI-generated political content impact voters? And we focus on three types of modalities. So on textual prompts, on the use of images, and the use of videos, and understand how that impacts voters. And this idea is also coming from this article from Chimson. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but it's very much on the idea that political micro-targeting and generative AI can create some kind of manipulation machine. And we wanted to test that. Is that actually the case? Does it work like this? So first I want to show the results of the first study where we focus on text. And here we developed a short political message using AI. First idea was to use a real-time political message was generated with AI, but it was ethically a little bit difficult. So we developed specific messages based on people's political identities, right? So a message which was focused on a left-wing voter or a right-wing voter, left-wing party or right-wing party, but it was focused on a young person or old person. We varied in a specific personality trait, which we focused on anxiety. So we had a calm versus more anxious message. And we use less salient topics because we assume that people are more likely to change their attitudes and behaviors when confronted with a less salient topic. So we use a between subject design. We focused our study on the 2024 European Parliamentary elections. We focused on 15 countries and around 7,000 people also participated, which give also a little bit of the high end also helps us to detect some small effects because that was our assumption, right? These are less salient issues, so the effects might be smaller. So this is the design. So here you can see that we have 3 independent variables, whether there was a match on party, whether there was a match on age, and whether there was a match on personality with the people who received the message. Then we looked at how they evaluated the ad that they saw, or the political message in this case, if they found it the issue in the ad as important and whether they agreed with the issue. We also looked at the interaction effect. So the assumption is that if you make the message even more personalized, so it matches your party, your age, your personality, that it will be even more effective. And then we looked at country comparison. We looked at length of EU membership as a country level predictor because we assumed that if you are a longer member of the EU, you're more used to political advertisement about the EU and the effects might be stronger. So here you see the different messages. It's basically a vignette study where we had like different messages, and here you see the different variants in the. So it's very we say we were a little bit more high on internal validity, but they did not see the ad as something which they saw in the timeline, right? So these are the political AI messages. They were generated with ChatGPT. And here you see some of the results. So we control for a lot of variables. Also how important you find the issue, for instance. And here you can see that political targeting, so there was a match on your political identities, whether you like the party which was mentioned in the message, that has a strong effect or stronger effect on ad evaluation, whether you find the issue important, and there's a marginal significant difference on issue agreements. The other variables did not have any effect. So matching on age didn't matter, and also matching on personality also didn't matter. And I think what's interesting is that the interaction effect didn't show any significant results. So it didn't matter that much if you combine some of these variables. We also saw a small effect on country level. So here we see whether there was an effect in different countries. We saw that targeting had a little bit stronger effects when for people in the countries which were longer a member of the EU. But the effects are very, I would say, very, very small. So I think we could say it's very much across the board effect, across countries, and there's not so many differences. We just want to highlight here that there were some differences, but they were very small, very marginally significant, so not so super strong. The article is also published. You can also read about it if you want to know more about the details. So I want to skip to the work of Puk Guldemond, who also did some of her work for this in her dissertation, because in the second study we want to focus on images, because again we found very small effects, and we were interested in, does the effects become stronger if you use images, if it's more visual? And the third study is about video, where you have sound and moving images, for instance. But this is Puk. I have a photo of her. She's also here, so she can also answer some questions. So for this study, we also again developed political ads using AI. For this study, Puk used Google Gemini Nano Banana. We used a 2x2x2 between subjects design. That means that we have an emotional appeal in the message, like a positive versus a negative one. That's also because that's something you see also during election, right? You see political parties either using a more positive frame or a more negative or fear appeal frame. Then we used, in this case, a left-wing party and a far-right party. We chose a far-right party because these parties are more likely, or we see that they use more AI-generated political messages in an election. And we varied the topic on climate and immigration. And this study, we use also a more salient issue. That's also because that's happening also in real life. And also wanted to understand a little bit better how people are affected by messages which are more about salient issues. So the data were gathered in October 2025. It was just before the Dutch parliamentary elections, and around 1,500 people participated. And these are, to some extent, representative of the Dutch population. So this is the theoretical model. So the idea is that there will be an effect of a negative versus a positive appeal in the message, but it depends very much if it's coming from an ad you already prefer, based on the previous research, that we know that these identities are very strong in affecting, for instance, how you see the ad or how acceptable you find the ad, and polarization. I will not talk a lot about polarization, but if you have any question about it, just let me know. But this is the model which is in theory, and this is the analytical model, right? Because we have two different parties. We were also very much interested if there was any asymmetry, right? So do people feel an ad which is coming from a left-wing party as less acceptable from coming from a right-wing party? Because we assume that people are more used to the fact that right-wing parties or far-right parties use AI messages. So we were interested in how this, how the different viewpoints affect some of these dependent variables that we measured here. So these are the stimulus material. So here you can see the images, also in the form of ads. On the left side, you can see the ad from the radical right-wing party, PVV, and also the appeal, which was negative, and the issue focusing on immigration. And on the right side, you see one from the left-wing party, GroenLinks PvdA, with a positive appeal, and also in this case focusing on climate change. And this is the full set of ads that we have. So the combinations of every issue, political party, and also appeal, like positive or negative. So what were the results? Here you can see the results on the dependent variable negative feelings. And you can clearly see here that there's a backfire effect. So on the bottom, you can see the likelihood to vote for the left-wing party. And if you get a left-wing AI-generated ads, you're more negative, right? So you see that the effect on the left side, you feel more negative, when it was the case for a positive appeal message. So left-wing party using these type of ads, and you're a left-wing voter, you punish that basically. You don't think that's okay. For the negative appeal was more, we didn't find such a strong difference, also a little bit. So this we call the backfire effect. Here you see the likelihood to vote for the right-wing party. So what's interesting, I think, is there's some kind of uniform negativity effect. So we don't really like negative appeals in political ads using AI. We find that very much, it creates a lot of negative feeling. For positive appeal, there's a little bit more differences, but not so much. And here you see, I think the more interesting results also in acceptability. You see clearly a motivated reasoning effect, right? So people who vote are more likely to vote for the far-right party, are more acceptable of political ads coming from a far-right party than come from left-wing party, and you see the same here as well. So likelihood to vote for a left-wing party also leads to is more acceptable if it's coming from a left-wing party. You don't find this effect for negative appeal though, for left-wing voters. So the third one, I think, was the most extreme one. We had a lot of discussions about this because when the time this study was fielded, there was also a lot of commotion, also coming from a video that was made by the PVV, but also showed that this is very a way that political parties, especially on the far right, use AI in their communication strategies during elections. So this AI video was made using Google Gemini VO3. We use, in this case, a 1 factorial design just because making the videos is more difficult. So we use the left-wing party versus the far-right party versus a control condition. So this a 1 factorial, but 3 groups subject design. So this data was gathered in March 2026, just before the Dutch municipal elections, and a little bit more than 1,000 people participated in this specific study. This was the conceptual model. So we have here a video, right? So a left-wing, far-right party video and a control AI video. We again have people's voting preferences and we use the same dependent variables. So this was the video from the far right. These are stills from the video, but there were also music around it. And we tried to use a video which is a little bit similar than the video that the PVV used during the elections. Also a lot of fear appeals again, right? So showing immigrants as well. And here you can see the video from GroenLinks PvdA. So a lot of the same images were used, but the focus was a little bit different. So focusing very much on climate change, also fear appeal messages about climate change. And fears around this. And we had a control condition, which is also AI generated to also make sure that it's not different. But here you can see it was just an AI video urging people to vote with like a little bit of the same issues, climate and immigration, for instance, but very much in a controlled way, in a control condition way. So here are some of the results. So again, negative feelings. Here we see what was interesting, that right-wing voters are more forgiving towards left-wing party using AI-generated videos. So here you can see a significant effect compared to the control condition. Here you see that there was again a backfire effect. So if you are a left-wing voter, so on the right side, and you receive a video, an AI-generated video from a left-wing party, you are having more negative feelings towards that AI video. But we also saw clearly, again, motivated reasoning. Here you see that, for instance. So if you are more likely to vote for a right-wing party and you see a far-right party AI-generated video, you found it way more acceptable than compared to the left-wing party using it. And here you see the same effect for likelihood voting for a left-wing party. And seeing a left-wing party AI-generated video is more acceptable compared to the far-right party. So here we see, again, motivated reasoning effects. So the conclusion out of all of these studies, and basically answering that question on the use of AI during election and impact on voters, we see that AI messages are most impactful when aligned with voters' political pre-existing preferences for left-wing and for right-wing voters. We see that basic demographic targeting, we didn't find evidence for persuasive impact, even with such a high sample. So I think these are, I'm certainly a little bit more confident that they're actually not there. Then personality-based targeting was also limited, and a little bit context-dependent effects, but also very small. And I think with the research on the videos and also on the pictures, we see more asymmetric effects, right? So for left-wing supporters are more negative towards AI-generated content from their own party. And there's a backfire effect for their own party of AI use. So we see that the clear backfire effects. And they're more likely to view far-right AI content as unacceptable. But for far-right voters, and I think we find some kind of normalization effect here, right? So I think far-right supporters are a little bit more normalized and are more accepting, right? So they're more accepting of AI-generated content from their own party, but also a little bit more when opposing parties use it, right? So here you can see, so there are motivated reasoning effects, but still they seem to be, the use of AI is more normalized on the right and than on the left. And what I think is an interesting finding is that negative AIs are generally disliked regardless of party. So we see more of these effects for positive appeals, but not so much for negative appeals. So it seems that people really don't like these negative appeals in AIs. So a general negative feeling towards those. So thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I hope you learned something today. I at least learned a lot by making this presentation, so it's also a lot of fun for me.
Thank you, Sanne. Very nice presentation, very insightful. The general part